Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to another exciting episode of Muslim Network TV, on Muslim Network TV called Canada Today with your host, Taha Ghayur once again. Today, I'm excited to have an interesting conversation, insightful conversation on Black History Month. February being a designated month by Heritage Canada as Black History Month is a time for us to reflect on the culture, heritage, and the great lives and legacies of Black Canadians, and in our case, also Black Canadian Muslims. And to talk about this interesting and sometimes complex topic we have two wonderful academics and individuals who are going to be sharing sharing their insights as well as their experiences when it comes to a topic like Black history and why it should matter to all of us. I want to start off by introducing to you Dr. Fatima Jackson-Best, who is a public health researcher and a specialist in mental health. Her work focuses on communities in Canada and the Caribbean. Dr. Fatima previously worked with the Black Muslim Initiative and Tessellate Institute to publish a systematic review on Black Muslims in Canada. Dr. Fatima is a lecturer at York University in the Department of Anthropology. She's also the project manager of Pathways to Care, where she is designing an intervention to improve access to mental health and addiction services for Black children, youth, and families in Ontario. Dr. Fatima Jackson joins us with a PhD from the University of Toronto's Dalla Lana School of Public Health, and she conducted her dissertation research on Black women's experiences of maternal depression in Barbados. So thank you so much, Dr. Jackson-Best, for being here with us this afternoon.
You're welcome.
Great. Next, we have Dr. Afua Cooper, who is an author, academic leader, award-winning senior academic, trained in history of Black people in Canada and the African diaspora. Her research on slavery, abolition, freedom, Black education, and women's studies across Canada has made her one of the leading figures in African Canadian studies. She currently teaches in the history department of Dalhousie University with cross appointments in sociology and social anthropology and gender and women's studies. Afua Cooper was previously nominated for a Governor General's Award for her book called The Hanging of Angelique, which was also named by the CBC as one of the best books published in Canada. So thank you so much, Dr. Fatima Jackson and Dr. Afua Cooper. Looking forward to have an inspiring conversation about not only on this topic, but also about some of your work and achievements.
Thank you, Taha.
You're welcome. So I want to start off, I guess, more on a personal note. I want to hear from you specifically. What does Black History Month mean to you personally? What sentiments come to your heart and to your mind when the month of February arrives and everybody starts talking about Black History Month? So I want to start with Dr. Afua Cooper and then Dr. Jackson-Best.
Thank you. So what Black History Month means to me is it's a time to reflect, it's a time to share, and it's a time to celebrate. It's also a time, as the month approaches, I think, oh my God, I'm going to be so tired this upcoming month, because everybody seems to want to do everything pertaining to Black history or Black studies during February. And so one of the things I do in this month is to say to people, can we do this in March or in April or the rest of the year? Because I want to underscore to people that Black History Month should be every day, or the study and reflection of Black history should be every single day and every single month. February, after all, is the shortest month of the year, and we want to pack everything into it. Nonetheless, it's really a time where you focus on the contributions and the achievements of African descended people in Canada. It's now federally recognized since 26 years ago, when Dr. Jean Augustine got the bill passed in the federal parliament to recognize Black History Month. But prior to that, it has been celebrated throughout Canada since the 1930s. But it's because Black history isn't really taught in school. I feel positive about February. It at least gives us the opportunity to focus on the accomplishments and contributions of our African descended people. But at the same time, I think we have to move conceptually beyond February.
Very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. How about you? Do you share similar sentiments, Dr. Jackson-Best?
Yes, I absolutely do share the similar sentiments with Dr. Cooper. I have always looked at Black History Month as both a time for us to celebrate and also take stock of what has happened and what we have gained as Black communities, but also to forecast and look at what we can still accomplish. I echo Dr. Cooper's statement that, Black History Month, for me, sometimes it's just another month, right? Because the work that we do, the engagement that our communities do, the amplification that we do of issues and also successes in our community, it happens year round. But absolutely, I see February as being an opportunity for us to really take it to another level and get more embedded and emboldened in our celebration of Blackness.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. So, Dr. Cooper, I wanted to ask you a question about the early communities, early Black Muslims, of course. I mean, many people may not know that the history of Black Muslims in Canada dates back to 1700s. And early Black Muslims, pioneers in particular, were instrumental in developing small communities at the time here. And so how have diverse Black communities help shape the current Black Muslim identities in Canada?
Thank you. So we can think about the total, a total North American picture, or a picture of the Islam within the wider Americas. So first thing, the first Muslims, the first people to establish an ummah, to call the adhan in North America were Africans, were West African Muslims, most of whom were enslaved. And we're thinking about people who came from the time of the Spaniards in the early 16th century, right up to the ending of the slave trade in places like Brazil by around 1850. Of course, illegal trading happened after 1850. And so we're told, historians tell us, that upwards of 15 million people were kidnapped and stolen from Africa, and at least a third were from Islamically oriented societies or were Muslims. So we're talking about 3 to 5 million people at least who were practicing Muslims or who were familiar with Islam itself. And some of these people certainly ended up in Canada. We know Richard Pierpoint came from Bondou in Fouta, which is in northern Senegal. He was a revolutionary soldier. He fought for the British during the American War of Independence, and then later on he fought again for the British during the War of 1812. And he lived in Upper Canada or in Ontario. It's also important to note that in this early period, because of enslavement, because of pressures to assimilate, many early Muslims would hide their religion. Not everyone, but some did, would hide the practice, and there were also pressures to convert. But we do know, and we're investigating the evidence, that some of the early Black communities, whether it was in Nova Scotia or in Quebec or in central Canada, meaning Ontario, going toward the Detroit River and over to Michigan, because that place, Michigan was part of Canada at one point, were Muslims. Now, as we move forward into the various centuries, people had more opportunities to come out and make themselves visible as Muslims. And so by the time we get up to the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, you had the people with the courage and the confidence to declare themselves, to establish Jamaat, to bring their families into the public eye as Muslims. And so it is a long history, but just to summarize the early communities within North America, and sometimes Taha, we can even think of Canada or the United States. In the early period, the frontier wasn't so rigid. People moved back and forth. So the idea of Islam, we have to think of it as sort of continental or even hemispheric, with so many Muslims in places like Panama and Jamaica and Brazil. For the later period, in our period, say in the past 50 years, I know Fatima has done work on that, but it's important to note that Black Canadians are not strangers to Islam, that we have been holding the torch, so to speak, for several centuries.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that background, actually. That's very helpful. So, Dr. Jackson-Best, Black, as we just heard, of course, Black Canadian Muslims played a significant role in shaping Canada's history. Some of it is known and some of it is not known. Some of it is still being investigated, I know. And when it comes to, of course, the contemporary and social achievements as well, and I know you have a lot of research in this area. So, but we also know that they experienced, just like sadly all Black Canadians, all Blacks out there, sadly, at that time and until this day, of course, in North America, they face their own share of anti-Black racism and discrimination. So what role, based on your research, what role did or does resilience and perseverance play in the development and success of these early Black Canadian Muslim communities?
That's a great question, Ta. Resilience is absolutely an integral part of the Black experience. There's no way that I could be sitting here in Toronto in the year 2021 and been able to accomplish all that I have been able to accomplish and all that I will accomplish. There's no way that I could have done this without the resilience of my ancestors and the resilience of our communities, right? So it's without a doubt that resilience and strength are an absolute part or a component of our story. But I also like to say, like, in addition to that resilience and that strength, there also is a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of sadness. There's a lot of violence, and there's a lot of very intentional systemic strategies that have been, used against Black communities, Black Muslim communities, and non-Muslim Black communities to essentially strip us of our heritage, of our knowledge, of our culture, etc. Right. So I think that when we talk about resilience, it's absolutely important for us to recognize the resilience that has allowed for, Dr. Cooper to accomplish all of the amazing, things that she has been able to accomplish. But we also have to think about, what the cost was, right? And the cost absolutely has been, knowledge of our history, right? Understanding of our culture, our language, our religion. I have no idea how many of my ancestors were actually, Muslim, because of the loss of our culture, right? So, I think that when we talk about it, we always have to have that kind of balance to talk about both, the resilience and the difficulties, right? The vulnerabilities.
Wow, that's a very interesting perspective. And I wonder, just as a follow-up, I wonder, does that explain why there seems to be a dearth of information when it comes to specifically the Black Canadian Muslims out there in terms of research?
Absolutely. So, a lot of what we know about Black Muslims is Black Muslims and Black Muslims in Canada and North America is based on, the academic scholarship of people like Dr. Cooper, Sylvain Diouf in the United States, and the list goes on and on and on of so many people who have worked tirelessly to uncover a history that has essentially been kept from us, right? So I think that it's important for us to know, like, the way that colonialism has intentionally done that kind of silencing, right? When it comes to Black communities, and particularly in places where the British were the colonizers, the British have basically sanitized the entire version of colonization to make themselves look like nothing much happened here. And we see a similar kind of erasure and a similar kind of overlooking that happens for the Canadian state, right? So it's all part of this entire program, essentially, of silencing and overlooking and covering up the atrocities that have been committed against us. And so in real time, that looks like, as I said, I don't know who of my family's on my father's side who's from Barbados or my mom's side who's African American, who might have been Muslim. My mom did an ancestry DNA test a couple of years ago, and it turns out that most of her ancestors came from countries that were majority West African countries that were majority Muslim, like Mali. Very, very shocking, right? So I have to assume that my ancestors, some of them had to have been Muslims, but I don't know, right? I don't have a clue yet. And so, these are the kinds of impacts that we see in real time of these, systemic policies of erasure, of colonialism, and erasure of the enslavement that happened in this country and all around, North America and the Western Hemisphere and elsewhere, right?
It's sad that Black History Month is supposed to be about celebrating heritage and culture. Yet, a lot of the times, even this conversation, it would be incomplete without talking about such heavy topics such as racism and discrimination and systemic, the colonial past that, all your ancestors, of course, have experienced, unfortunately. So it's really tragic hearing this. But this is, of course, an opportunity as well for us to now hopefully learn from this and, inshallah, never repeat such mistakes. And as we say, no to all forms of genocide every time, never again. So we want to make sure none of that ever happens again, inshallah. So Dr. Cooper, coming to you, you dedicated much of your career to culture. And last year, Nova Scotia recognized your contributions and awarded you with the Portia White Prize, mashallah. You served as Halifax's 7th Poet Laureate, and you also published 6 poetry books, and you helped establish the dub poetry movement in Canada. So I wanted to ask you, why is poetry and art so important to you when it comes to generating a public discussion, building a sound narrative around Black heritage, history, race, and social justice?
Thank you, Taha. Well, I think I was raised in a poetic environment. And what do I mean by that? I was born and raised in Jamaica. I lived in rural areas and I lived in urban areas. So I think I got the best of both worlds. In rural areas, I had my grandmother and, her sisters, her brothers, people of her generation who told us stories. That's what I mean by I was raised in a poetic environment. And I don't know if they were conscious of what they were doing, but they would tell us stories. And these were like histories, not folk tales, but more stories of what they did when they were kids, of, when they got married, and there was a rebellion against the British, those sort of things. So I was always captivated by those stories. And, when I went to school, we always had poetry day. In fact, every Friday was poetry day. And so we had to memorize poetry by different poets, some of whom were Caribbean poets. And then we also had to write our own poetry. So I think that growing up in that environment made this latent talent or this latent gift that I had surface. It came alive. So by the time I was 17, I could say I was a poet. I started writing poetry and reading to people. But again, I talk about growing up in Jamaica. It was a place that was and still is filled with history. History was always kind of staring at you through the window, or, pulling your jacket or something. And what do I mean by that? The stories of slavery, the story of the fight against the colonial power, the story of a relative you had who had to go abroad to find work because the colonization was just so severe. And so I found this voice, I was able to use it as a means to express a range of diverse topics and a range of diverse emotions. I found one of the voices that I developed was this historical voice in which I wrote a poem or poems about Marie Joseph Angelique and my grandmother, who became a widow at the age of 29. But poetry also allows us to tap into the unconscious mind. It allows us to get into the space where you can reflect, where you can think, where you can dream. There are many, many poetic voices: the voice of rage, the voice of anger, the voice of beauty, of love and compassion. And so it was fantastic when I discovered that you had all this range, and you could use it to help to create a space of beauty, a space of knowing and knowledge, and also as a tool to inform people, including yourself, about life. And so I use it in addition to my work on fiction and my work on nonfiction like histories. I just think poetry is a fantastic way to engage community and to help people. And I love it because I read poetry all the time, and it's a way to also make me relax, but to come to tremendous reflection. And I mean, some talk about some Muslim poets is like Rumi, for example. Everybody talks about Rumi. People know Rumi has been co-opted by the West. Well, not really co-opted, but as if he's not a Muslim. They always talk about Rumi. It's a great poet, but I'm thinking, did you hear what Rumi said about, the dust that the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings on him, walks on his, I can't even follow in that footsteps. So he was such a pious and devout man. So he's like serves as an inspiration because he allows me to see the inner and the outer and what you can do with poetry. And I'm hoping in my own small way to do that. I served as a poet laureate of Halifax from 2018 to 2020. And one of the things I did was to speak at the Halifax explosion, the 103rd, that would have been 2019 anniversary of the explosion. The explosion happened in 2017, so it was the 102nd commemoration. And so I was commissioned to write a poem. And I thought, what am I going to write about the explosion? The explosion killed so many people, destroyed parts of the city. But then I engaged the histories of the Black people, some of them who died or who were injured during the explosion and who their families never received compensation because of racism. They didn't get the big up that they should have got. And so that's what I did. So it was a fantastic way for me to bring the historical voice and to bring the arts, this discipline, to create this sort of sound narrative.
That's beautiful and powerful.
Yeah, that's me reading at the explosion in the middle of winter.
Yeah.
The anniversary, rather.
Well, though, that's beautiful and powerful. Thank you so much for sharing this. The power of poetry, especially in telling our stories. So, and it's again a medium that a lot of people don't use. So, thank you so much for doing that. And another question that I again related to your accomplishments. I mean, you have written several books, of course, about Black women and their history and race, and slavery and anti-Blackness in Canada. And your work has has placed Dalhousie University on map for other researcher for the research on race specifically. So, do you think other universities should make similar strides in examining the link to inequality and other things that we don't usually talk about, especially in academic settings?
Yeah, I do believe that. I strongly believe that. When we did that at Dalhousie, it was because the 200th anniversary of the school was coming up, and the elephant, there were all these initiatives. There were going to be public commemorations, parties, receptions, but the elephant in the room was, okay, we're celebrating the school founded by a man who was a known racist, Lord Dalhousie, who wanted to deport Black people from Nova Scotia because he thought of Nova Scotia as a white man's country. He was governor of the province. And so that was the elephant in the room, and we pointed that out. The report was commissioned. And and so it allowed the university to really take a good look at itself. And the report is online; people can read it. And I think, not I think, I know we have been successful with regards to our own institution, but some other schools took up the charge of this investigation. King's College University, which is a sister school to DAL, also launched its own investigation. McGill is doing so as we speak. I know the University of New Brunswick is following suit. And Ryerson had an investigation on racism and anti-Black racism at Ryerson. So, I mean, the American schools are they started it off. So many of them launched, like dozens of American schools, and some of the British schools, which resulted in this body called USS, University Studying Slavery. It's a consortium of about 75 schools.
Oh.
So I think, because the thing is, Taha, so many of these institutions in Canada, institutions of higher learning, got their start, as we know, through nefarious means, whether it's through the slave trade, whether it's by having some of the owners or the governors or the leaders were slave owners themselves, whether they appropriated in indigenous lands to build the physical structure of the colleges. It's all there, whether they were linked through the transatlantic slave trade, through the African church or the Presbyterian denomination. It's all there, which is what we discovered with Dalhousie University. Wow. And so this investigation is necessary, because when we're speaking about equity, EDI initiatives, education is so important. And when you look at who is at the pinnacle of this educational structure, these are the universities. And in many ways, their weight is oppressive, because they were founded in oppression.
Thank you so much for making that link. I never thought of it that way, actually, and I'm so glad you're bringing that up. And really something to actually have a show of its own to talk about, sadly, in future. Now, Dr. Fatima Jackson-Best, according to a recent article in CBC, Black Canadian Muslims face combined oppression of anti-Black racism and Islamophobia. And I'm sure that's not news to you and to us. So based on your research, tell us about how the various layers of identity can intersect and create a complex reality for our Black Muslim brothers and sisters in Canada, and how would the lived experience based on one's identity affect it?
Absolutely. So, in 2019, in 2018, I started some work looking at the Black Muslims in Canada. It was the first time that, a group of organizations, or two organizations, which was the Black Muslim Initiative and the Tesla Institute, came together to receive funding and to advance this project to explore what was going on, or what had happened, or what was the body of research related to Black Muslims in Canada. And so I was, I led the work, and it's a work that I engaged in purely from a point of view of like a passion. As a Black Muslim in Canada and born in Canada, I knew that it was important for somebody to do this work, to consolidate all the information. And so what we did was that we basically did a literature search, grey literature, academic literature, etc., to see what kinds of research exists about Black Muslims in Canada. And one of the two papers that I found from a woman named Delise Mugabo, who's a Rwandese Black Muslim woman, she talked about this existence of anti-Black Islamophobia. And so, and this has been a term that, I've seen people use, and that has been taken up, whether it was influenced by Mugabo or, influeed to the work that I conducted on Black Muslims in Canada, or just in the ways that we talk about, the overlap of discriminations that we experience by being Black and Muslim. And so, what's interesting is that this term anti-Black Islamophobia, it both points to the kinds of anti-Blackness that we experienced from non-Muslims who are also non-Black. But it also, anti-Black Islamophobia also talks about, or it also indicates the kinds of overlapping oppressions and discriminations and racism that we experience from people who are also Muslim but non-Black, right? And so that looks like, in our religious spaces being overlooked, being ignored, being targeted, being blamed for, crimes that we did not commit, being, just being overall looked at and regarded as being suspicious in our own mosque spaces, masjids, etc., on committees, not being represented on mosque committees, not being represented on panels, etc. And so, Black Muslims have been talking about this erasure for a very, very long time. Nothing that I discussed in that systematic review is brand new news if you live the experience being Black Muslim. I would say that, mostly all Black Muslims have the experience of going into a mosque space and being made to feel that you're not from there, or people automatically assuming that you are a newcomer to the religion, right? For me, I was born Muslim, and so when I walk into a mosque space and people want to know, like, how long have you been Muslim, or when did you convert? It's not to erase the experience of Black Muslims who have converted, but there are also many Black Muslims who have been born 1, 2, 3 generations Muslim, right? And so that does take a toll on the way that you identify and the kind of belonging or the kind of kinship that you feel with other Muslims, because you're always looked at as being an outsider or an outlier. And that's why the research is so important, and what Dr. Cooper is saying is so important, because it really gives evidence to the realization and to the fact that the first Muslims to ever step foot in Canada and America and the Caribbean were enslaved Black Muslims, right? And not only that, people of my father's generations in the 60s and the 70s worked so incredibly hard to establish Black Muslim communities, to create cultural centers, and to create places where myself and my cousins and my siblings, etc., we could go and we could practice and we could feel both Black and Muslim at the same time. That has been ongoing for a very long time. And so I always get a little prickly when I hear about people kind of framing Black Muslims as this new, this new group, or this, it's this brand new information or brand new research. Because when we talk amongst ourselves, Black Muslims, none of this is new, right? Our identity is so embedded and so deeply a part of who we are and a part of our makeup. That we have. We are in many ways the blueprint, but oftentimes we are overlooked or we are completely ignored.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that, and definitely that study is something that every Canadian Muslim in particular should read and see, because as you said, there's so much sadly ignorance out there about the presence of Canadian Black Muslims and even North American Black Muslims out there, sadly. Wanted to follow up with another question, Dr. Jackson-Best. In one of your roles as project manager of Pathways to Care, you are examining the mental health and addiction services for Black youth and children and families. And actually, one of our previous Canada Today shows, we actually examined, of course, issues related to racialized communities and issues of training, mental health training among law enforcement agencies, and the missing link there, and so on. So I wonder why a project like this is so important to you, and why is it so important for Black Canadian Muslims and Black Canadians in general?
Well, it's actually crucial. When I look at the data, so some of the data that we've been able to produce and also to, highlight has really shown the deep inequities and lack of access to services that many Black people experience, including Black youth. So one of the most kind of pressing stats that I always refer back to is that when we look at access to mental health services in Canada, or I believe it was in Ontario specifically, Black youth, Black communities face wait times of twice the average wait time of a white person. So that looks like 16 months versus 8 months for white people. And in 16 months, so much can happen, right? People's mental health can exacerbate. A mental health challenge can can transcend to a full mental illness. There are so many things that can happen in that 16-month wait time. And so with Pathways to Care, we're looking to investigate and to intervene at the systems level. And one way that we are looking to do that is by basically demystifying and increasing access to mental health services for Black communities, Black youth, Black service providers, and service providers who serve Black youth, whether they are themselves Black or non-Black. But mental health and mental illness is something that affects us across the board. Human beings, we're all experiencing it, especially as we're living through this pandemic. The discussions about mental health and mental illness have reached like a peak, right? And we're all implicated through, social distancing and all of the sacrifices that we've had to make over the last year. And so people's mental health and mental wellness has absolutely been taking, huge hits in the last, 12 months of this pandemic, or just about 12 months of this pandemic. And so, if we're thinking about Islamically, it's incumbent upon us to, as Muslims, take care of ourselves, to be well, to take care of one another, and to ensure that we have support, social supports. That's why we have zakah. That's why we have so many mechanisms that are tied into our faith, right? And I think that we need to really start looking at mental health in the same way, right? That this is a part of our faith, that we need to nurture it the same way that we nurture our health, the same way that we nurture our spirituality. And so when you look at it from that perspective, and when you look at the gaps and the inequities that exist in terms of access to mental health care for Black people, a project like Pathways to Care is absolutely, crucial for us to engage in and to support.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that. And we wish you all the best in this amazing work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Let's come back to the Black History Month as we try to conclude over the next 10 minutes or 15 minutes or so. I wanted to ask you, both of you now, a few questions about Black History Month. One is, are there any misconceptions about Black History Month out there, especially in the Muslim community, since I know Dr. Jackson-Best, you just talked about some barriers, for instance, the Muslim community even in particular. So are there any misconceptions or myths that you think you may want to highlight and dispel about Black History Month as it is celebrated every year? And maybe we'll start with Dr. Afua Cooper at this point.
If there's a myth there, it could be that people think Black History Month is for Black people. And it is for Black people. And one of the reasons that it came about was because, a knowledge of Black heritage, history, and culture wasn't taught in schools, whether it's from kindergarten or university. It wasn't part of a mainstream knowledge production. So it was Black people, Dr. Carter G. Woodson, and some of his colleagues in Washington, D.C. in the United States, that came up with the idea in the 1920s of what was first called Negro History Week, then expanded to Negro History Month, which was February, and then as years went by, the terminology changed. Negro became Black, and in some jurisdictions in Canada, people actually are now saying African Liberation Month or African Heritage Month, but a more popular name is Black History Month. So it was started for Black people by Black people, because Black people's knowledge of our history, culture was erased, was marginalized. But another important objective of the month, or Black history itself, is to inform others, non-Black people, that Blacks within North America and the world certainly have had a long, a proud, and a vibrant history. History has been one of struggle. The history also has been one of resilience, as was talked about earlier by Fatima. The history has been also about achievement and accomplishment. So to dispel that myth that it's only for Black people, I think would be, it is a good objective, and people are working towards that. I know the Toronto Federation of Elementary School Teachers, which is a very diverse group, if you can think of school teachers, and their elementary school teachers, has now a document or a teaching and learning document called 360 Days of Black History. So that particular association has busted out of, the framework of February, and for them it's the whole year, and that's fantastic. That's one means of dispelling the myth. Another myth that people may have is that it's all about parties and dancing and eating food. That's part of it too, but it's not all about that. That's not the primary objective. And I mention this because a couple of years ago, I did a Black History Month lecture at Joyceville Penitentiary in Kingston area, Kingston, Ontario. And it was organized by the Black inmates and friends, and by other inmates, Muslim inmates, and general group of inmates. I gave a lecture. There was someone else who gave a lecture. The inmates themselves made food. They cooked. We all ate. The following day, in a newspaper in the area, in the Ottawa area, the headline was something like Caribana-style celebration at Joyceville Penitentiary. Like, what? Nothing about the lectures that we gave, nothing about the discussion. There were even a panel with different inmates on it. Black Muslim inmates were talking about the faith and practicing their faith. And, a well-known imam was present there too. Nothing about that. So the media deliberately took this and said, we were having a Caribana-style celebration in the prison. Now just think of that and what people think when they see that headline, right? So it's further to perpetuate that myth, and also to cast aspersions on the Black community, and also to cast even more aspersion on the inmates themselves. So Black History Month is for everyone, but the focus is on Black people commemorating their diverse, painful and joyful history at the same time.
That was great. Thank you so much for sharing that. Do you have anything to share or add to what we just heard, Dr. Jackson-Best?
Absolutely. So I think that one of the biggest myths is that we in Canada don't need Black History Month, or it's an African American thing because of the legacy of enslavement, and that's an African American thing. And I mean, now I think that we have a much better grasp over the magnitude and the destructiveness of enslavement of African people in Canada, to dispel that. And I think that if anybody still has any, misconceptions or confusion around it, you can easily pick up one of Dr. Cooper's books. The Hanging of Angelique is a beautiful book, a beautifully written book about a very tragic experience of an enslaved woman in Montreal. And the way that she met her end. I think that a lot of the times Canadians, well-meaning Canadians, including non-Black Muslim Canadians, don't realize that there was slavery in Canada, right? And that, the story of Black people and Black Muslims does not start, in the 60s with, the immigration of, people from the Caribbean, like my father, right? It happened so much longer, so much before. There's times before that. I would say that that's one of the myths, right? And it's connected to that myth of, Canada being, hands off when it comes to the enslavement of Black communities, which we know is absolutely untrue. That's one. I think that's one myth that I would say exists about Black History Month. I would say that the other myth that exists is that all Black communities in Canada are the same, and we're absolutely not. We're incredibly diverse. My experience as somebody who is, as I said, Caribbean, African American, Canadian born is very different from communities who have immigrated as refugees from perhaps East Africa, right? We have to recognize that Black history means different things to different people, and it's going to be executed in different ways. But we're not a monolithic community. We're incredibly diverse. We have incredibly diverse and divergent paths to Canada, and the way that we're treated in Canada is also very, very different. And so I would say that that also is one of the myths of Black history, that it's just this kind of generalized Black history that we're celebrating, when it's actually quite nuanced, and there's a lot of substance and diversity there.
Awesome. I mean, this is very, very insightful. Both of you have shared some very, very insightful myths that sadly many of us, and including myself in the past especially, had about the Black History Month. So thank you so much for busting some of those myths here. Now, a couple more questions. How can non-Black non-Black Muslims, Canadian Muslims, celebrate this month in a meaningful way and have a meaningful engagement with our Black Canadian Muslims living through their Blackness, through their faith, and through their struggles of justice, or for justice? So we'll start with Dr. Cooper.
Thank you, Taha. I think that the time that we live in, it demands that we become conscious. We are called to become conscious, each and every one of us, each and every community. African descended communities or African communities within Canada has suffered a disproportionate amount of oppression over these past 4 centuries. It's no longer something anecdotal. I say, oh, when I was on the TTC, somebody shouted at me the N-word. That might have happened. But we have the data. We have the statistics. We have the empirical evidence. And when you look across all social indices, you see how Black people are disproportionately affected. So, for example, criminal justice. Within Toronto itself, the Blacks only make up 8% of the population. But as was released last year by the Ontario Human Rights Commission, the report Disparate Impact, it tells us that Blacks, especially Black men, are 20 times more likely to die at the hands of the police than other non-Black community. We're in time of COVID now. We see that Black communities are disproportionately impacted in education, in prison incarceration, and it's on and on and on. That can't be denied anymore. So people, we are at a time where to turn your head and look behind you, or to engage in denial, it's gonna cost you, really. So for me, it's about people opening their hearts, opening your heart to empathy, to compassion, being compassionate, being empathetic, especially all of us, but maybe I'm throwing the challenge out there to Muslims, because these qualities of empathy and compassion is inbuilt within our faith. And even when we think of Prophet Muhammad's peace and blessings on him, his last sermon, when he talks about, the white is not better than the Black, the Arab is not better than the non-Arab, but men are not better than women, so on and so forth. If we use that as a kind of charter of human rights and freedom, then our hearts will be open towards our Black brothers and sisters. We can't deny it anymore. We can't look behind ourselves anymore. We can't say, oh, well, it's their fault. That's actually un-Islamic to think that way. Black people have suffered tremendously. That's a fact. What problem do you have with that? You are now in a position to make a difference. You're now in a position to become allies. We all are guilty in some way, shape, or form when we see people suffering and we do nothing. And so we have governments at each level, at the city, the province, at the nation, the federal government, who are paying lip service to this idea of equality for all. But we have to push them, and we are pushing them. Now, I want people to join forces with the Black community and to push this struggle further. Because here's one thing we know, Taha. Mm-hmm. And here's why this is important. Whenever Blacks, if we just take what has happened to George Floyd, his murder, and how that has, and may God rest his soul and grant him peace, how that has opened up opportunities for every community. in terms of social justice initiatives. If we come back to Canada in the 70s and 80s, when Black communities clamored for, at that time it was called affirmative action, but it's the same idea, I think. And we're at the front line of the struggle. And when the gates opened, so to speak, and when the barriers were removed, all other visible minority communities were able to rush in the door and got opportunities, sometimes even over the Black people who were in the trenches at the beginning. When we look at and remember that in Canada, we had a white-only immigration policy for about 100 years. Then in the 50s and 60s, you had groups like the Negro Community Association and other groups who went to Ottawa, who petitioned, who lobbied, who said, this is racist, you need to do away with those discriminatory immigration policies. It happened, began with Diefenbaker, expanded under Pearson and Trudeau. Again, Black people in the front line, everybody benefit. You had a lot of Muslims coming in from Asia and Middle East and everywhere. But Black people laid those struggles and laid down those struggles, and in many ways did not benefit from the whatever it was, the opportunities that were provided. Same thing in the United States. In the 60s, when the Civil Rights Movement and the Black Power movement, the people from those movements really fought again so that the American government could open up the immigrant, because they had restrictive immigration policies. And that was when you had millions of people from South Asia, from the Middle East, from East Asia, who were allowed to come in the United States. And then across North America, these people came in and then they turned their backs on Black people who waged the struggle for, when Dr. King spoke, when Malcolm X spoke, when Dudley Law spoke, they spoke for the Black people, of course, because we were the ones suffering. But when they spoke and when changes were made and the doors open and the gates open, everybody benefited. So people must know, help us, the Black community, to push forward this struggle for equality. Because if one suffers in terms of the Islamic concept, then the whole community is suffering.
Amazing. Thank you so much for articulating this, Dr. Cooper. So much needed. I needed to hear this personally. Dr. Fatima Jackson-Best, your thoughts on allyship?
I mean, Dr. Cooper said it so perfectly. I can only add that I think that we are at a moment, right, where we have, even though we are more fragmented in terms of our ability to connect directly with one another, we are in a place technologically where we can connect unlike we ever have before. And I think that non-Black Muslims have to take advantage of this opportunity. And that doesn't just mean, having a last minute Black History Month event and inviting, a Black Muslim that you Googled or that you are friends with, right? It really means like cultivating relationships within our communities and across our communities. I think that if you want to be an ally, like, we have to develop friendships, right? You have to understand, as Dr. Cooper said, our particular struggles and the kind of blueprint that Black communities have provided for, people, for non-white people across North America. And so, I think that in this time of increased connectivity that we have, we need to be fostering more meaningful, sustainable relationship building that can take us beyond this pandemic, beyond this moment of, of Black Lives Matter and George Floyd and the outrage and the public kind of outrage that we saw over the summer. We need to move towards concrete action. We need to move towards policy change. And I think that when we think about policy change, a lot of the times we think about the government or, the way that, the prime minister is going to enact policies that are going to trickle down into our lives. But actually, our mosques have policies, right? Our organizations, they have policies. And so I think that, and sometimes those policies can be rooted inadvertently in anti-Blackness and anti-Black racism. And so, if we're looking to transform our societies, we have to have that same kind of, zeal to transform the connections that we have, or the kinds of societies that we have inside of our societies through our organizations and our mosques and our masjids, etc. We have to take a really cold, hard look at how many Black people are on our mosque boards, how many Black people are on our organizational boards, how many Black people have been invited to a panel event, who is speaking on behalf of Black communities and why, and how can we eliminate that, right? There's so much work that we have to do. And I really feel that a lot of Black Muslims have basically extended the olive branch, extended the knowledge, and extended ourselves to, invite people in and to work with us, right? And a lot of the times it feels like we're actually waiting for somebody to take that up. And people get tired of waiting, but for Black communities, it's like our liberation is always going to be tied up in the liberation of all people, because oppression, as we know anywhere, is a threat to justice everywhere. Everybody knows that, right? So we cannot work in silos. We absolutely have to work in collaboration every single time.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I agree. Could not agree more. I mean, this is excellent. Let me just ask one last question, 1 minute each for each one of you. And that is, I know you touched on this already, but just as to summarize, you can just share maybe a couple of tips or things that Canadian Muslim institutions and leaders should not do, or maybe doing wrong when it comes to showing allyship with the Black Canadian Muslims, and or even when it comes to celebrating the Black History Month. So maybe we'll start with Dr. Fatima Jackson this time, and with Dr. Cooper.
So I would say absolutely, I think organizations have to expand their pool of Black Muslims, historical Black Muslims to celebrate. I would never speak ill of Malcolm X. He is absolutely one of the most important Black Muslims that we know of contemporarily. And we also have other Black Muslims who have set the stage, who have done important work, who have engaged and fought against racism. So I would say that it's incumbent for organizations, mosques, etc., to ensure that they are maintaining and continuing to be educated about Black Muslims contemporarily and historically, so that we can continue to highlight the achievements, the history, the struggles of Black Muslims in North America and in Canada. I would also say that one thing not to do would be to tokenize Black Muslims, right? It feels very, very tokenistic when, it's February 1st, and I kid you not, Taha, your inbox, if you have ever spoken about Black Muslims or identify as a Black Muslim, your inbox is going to be flooded with last minute invitations to participate in panels, to, be a part of this conversation or that, etc. And it feels like an afterthought, right? It feels unplanned, it feels disorganized, and it doesn't make me feel, and I wager any Black Muslims feel, as if this is a genuine commitment towards working with Black communities towards liberation. It's just like, let's do an event, and we've reached our quota and we can check that off. We need to have engagement and understanding and events that include Black community members beyond Black History Month, right? Black History Month is one time to do that. And if you're going to do that, I would urge everybody to show respect to the people that you're approaching to participate in whatever event you're having. Do it ahead of time. But also, as Dr. Cooper said, think about how you can continue to amplify Black Muslim voices, Black perspectives, Black experiences beyond February.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Very, very well said. Thank you. And yes, Dr. Cooper, to end the conversation.
Yeah, thank you. I think Dr. Fatima Jackson-Best has said everything I wanted to say. So I'll just add that, don't rush in at the last minute and say, oh, we got to do a Black History Month event. And here's what we're going to do. You want to do a Black History Month event? Connect with the people in the Black community way before February 1st, and ask, what is it you want to talk about? What it is you want to engage? Don't come up with a ready-made topic. I mean, it could be a ready-made topic if it's something very urgent, or but just engage people, collaborate. So that's what I see. Collaboration is necessary in terms of building what is called allyship. So collaborate with people and come up with a topic that they're interested in, or what they think is pertinent. And what not to do, and be open, be flexible, because I'm thinking February is a short month. It's the shortest month of the year. And there are other months. So if you can't do it in February, I'm doing something for one of the masjids I go to. And I said to Imam, I can't do February. It's just too packed. How about March? And he agreed. So I'm doing it in March. That's fantastic. So have the flexibility. And it's a learning. And like I said, we enter with an open heart. Our heart should be strong, empathetic, compassionate, and fierce.
Amazing. Well, this was a very powerful conversation, and I hope, inshallah, we'll be doing a lot more of, and we've been doing actually for the last few months, talking about a few interesting themes that we have interwoven. But this was really an eye opener for me. Some of the things you both talked about. So thank you so much, both of you, Dr. Cooper and Dr. Jackson-Best, for your very, very powerful insights tonight, this afternoon. And we look forward to having you more often to talk beyond February, to talk about issues that actually matter, because the lived realities and experiences of Black Canadians and Black Muslim Canadians don't just end, February 28th. It is throughout the year, and sadly throughout their lives. So we want to be part and be allies with them in their good times and, of course, challenging times. So thank you so much once again. We look forward to having you once again in the near future.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Taha.
Thank you, Taha. Thanks, Fatima.
Thank you, Dr. Cooper.
Yeah. Thanks, Aisha. Aisha is in the background there, and to all the team.
Thank you for that token of gratitude. Appreciate it. So as we conclude, folks, unfortunately we are out of time. In fact, over time, and we are so appreciative of two wonderful academics who actually shared their insights today. And we hope you learned something that you can take home tonight and for the rest of the year to apply on a daily basis when it comes to celebrating Black lives and Black heritage and Black Muslim heritage and culture and legacy that we have, right here in our own communities and in Canada. So with that, I would like to thank our wonderful production team, Saliha Farouk, as well as Aisha Malik. And we look forward to seeing you next week with another episode of Muslim Network TV Canada Today show. Once again, signing off, Taha Ghayur for today. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.